In this video, I'll be covering how to create this dashboard in Power BI. It doesn't matter if you're a complete beginner or you're simply wanting to recreate this design, I'll be covering the full end-to-end, so from the actual Excel file all the way to the actual visualizations and how you end up with this dashboard. So if you'd like the files, you can find that in the description, sign up and go to the community tab, and over there you can download the files that I'm using in this video. And feel free to follow along, that's probably the best way to learn. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and build this dashboard. The first thing that we're going to do is apply the theme to our reports. The reason for this is when we create our visualizations, we often have to change the color. And when you're building a custom report, you want to use your own colors and not have to actually search for them manually. So let's go ahead and learn how to actually apply the theme to our report so that it automatically populates. So if you're following along in the practice file, you'll see that we have all of these color codes available. If you don't, then just feel free to just copy these. But what we need to do is copy these color codes and insert them into a single notepad. So by doing that, this will make the next step a lot easier. So now if we head over to view, select the drop down, let's first select Twilight. Twilight is a very simple theme that allows us to have no backgrounds, no titles. It's really easy to work with. Once we've selected that, if we select customize current theme, we can now apply our colors that we have to our panel. So let's go ahead and add those colors one by one. So I'm just going to do that. So once you've added your colors, let's hit apply, and that will now load that theme into our report. So whenever we create a visual, it will just use one of the colors that we have here. So let's move on to actually loading our data and how we go about doing that in Power BI. So if we go to home, we can see we have a range of different connectors at the top. We have SQL Server, Excel Workbook, and then this thing called Get Data. Now in this video, I'll be using an Excel file, but just for your knowledge, if you select Get Data, we have some more connectors. Then if we select more, this is where we have absolutely everything. So all of your major sort of data storage providers, you'll have quite a lot of common connectors available here. For example, Azure, Google Analytics, etc. But we're using an Excel file. So if we just search Excel Workbook, that will now allow us to find our file. So if I select all type because it's a CSV and load that in, we will see that a preview of our data will appear. So we can see that we have a table and we can either load that in or transform data. Now, whenever it's your first time actually pulling in or loading data, we don't want to select load. It's always worth going and selecting transform data because this will now open up Power Query. So Power Query is essentially the kitchen for your data. So before it actually goes into your model, that whole data load process and the things that happen to the data or you might want to do, that's what happens in Power Query. So for example, your source file has the columns ship mode, but in your report, you want it to say shipping mode. So you can click that column header and then actually write shipping mode. So now, whenever you actually refresh your report with new data, it will go through your applied steps, so every transformation you've made, and it will apply the steps that you've done. So we just changed the title from ship mode to shipping mode. And then, for example, if we want to change customer name to customer, we can do so as well. Now, the next thing that we want to do, which is always worth doing when you load your data, is checking the data types. So every column has a data type. Power BI will try to automatically recognize that. Now, it doesn't always get it right, so it's worth validating that your Power Query has picked up those data types. So for example, our order date, this is a date column, and if we select the data types, it has been set to date, and the same thing for shipping date as well. So that's an example of when we have a date, you need to ensure that the column type is date. If we move over and then we have markets, regions, these are all strings or text. So we need to ensure that they're text. And then if we go to our values, depending on what type of value is, if it's got a decimal, then add 1.2. If it's not, we can just do a whole fixed number or a whole number. So Power Query can do a lot more than this as well. It can do much more complex transformations with this language called M, which is essentially a language that allows you to do calculations in Power Query and allow you to do things with your tables and shape them. But an example of some of the grid functionality that we have is, for example, we have our segments or our shipping mode. Instead of having standard class as one word, we don't really need class. So what we can do is split that column by delimiter. And what we can say is split by the leftmost space, and we have a range of different options, but by now selecting OK, we can see it has now split that column and has applied that step over here as well. And then what we can do is rename our column after that as well, back to shipping mode. So that's an example of another transformation. And then you can do things such as if we want to change consumer or everywhere where consumer is in this column to another name, we could right click and then select replace values and then set that to, I don't know, consumer department. And now that will apply to all of our data. There's a lot more that you can actually do with Power Query, and I have a full tutorial on that on the channel. But for now, and what we're doing in this report, we don't need to do any more. So I'm going to leave it at that. So let's go ahead and now close and apply. So I actually have a duplicate of this table. So let's delete that one and then select close and apply. So now that our data has actually been loaded into the report, let's go ahead and create a new page. So this is where we're actually going to build our report. The first thing we want to do is adjust the canvas size. So this is where we build our visualizations, and we can adjust the size of this by selecting that, going to the formatting pane and then canvas settings, selecting custom. And if we write 1080 by 1920, we now have a bigger canvas that we can work with. So I'm just going to zoom out slightly. And now we have a larger space that we can actually place our visuals in. After we've changed the canvas size, let's go ahead and change the background. So canvas background, and then let's select the gray that we imported and then set the transparency to 70%. So let's go ahead and create some of our background elements. So by going to insert and then shapes, we can select rectangle. Bring that all the way to the left-hand side. And then what we want to do is go to shape, style, fill, and then set that to white. And then for the border, we want to use the lightest gray. And then if we drag that to the bottom and adjust the width to 231. So by selecting this visual, size and style, let's set this to 231. So we now have the width of our page navigation. So we're going to put all our page navigation over here. So let's copy this shape and then create an element for the top. So this is going to be our header, or where we place our search bar. So once again, drag that all the way to the corner. And the width for that we want is, or the height that we want for that actually is 56. So that's our height. What we can do then is just copy this visual and place that underneath. So the next thing we want to do is remove this thickness that we have in the line at the top here. It just doesn't look that great. So let's make this wider. And what we can do is by holding shift, select both of these items, going to format, send backward, and then select center back. Now these elements will be behind this element here, and we won't see that duplication of the border or the line itself. So we have our two items. Let's go ahead and create our title. So what we're going to do is insert text box, and then let's call this dashboard overview. And the size that we want for this is 18, and the font we're going to use is DIN. So if we drag that now, we can place that in the center. And if you hold Alt, it gives you some freedom. You can place that in that section here. So we now have our title. Let's go ahead and add our search bar. So in one of the newer releases of Power BI, they released this slicer called a text slicer. And what we can do is insert any field into here. So let's insert, for example, our subcategory. And then if we drag this to the top, turn off title, and drag that across, we now have a search bar where we can search for our subcategories. So for example, office. What was our subcategories? I don't actually remember this data set too well. So subcategory, for example, paper. So if we searched paper and entered, that would then filter whatever visuals that we have here. But we don't actually have any visuals, so we'll go back to that. Anyway, so now we're going to create our first visuals, which are the cards. So to do that, we can select the new card visual. And if you're a complete beginner, you might do something like this, where you select sales and then profit, quantity, etc. Now, this is probably not a good idea, and you always want to get into the habit of creating measures. The reason for this is when you want to start doing some slightly more complicated calculations, using your inbuilt columns, or I think it was used to be, I don't remember this, but it was implicit measures, where these are just built in. These are not that great when it comes to actually doing anything when it comes to calculations. So I highly recommend we create some measures. So measures are essentially a store or a calculation that we can apply in our reports. So by going to insert, actually we don't even have to, we can select new measure. Let's do our first calculation. So for example, our sales, we want to call this sales, and then we can do a sum of the sales column. Oh, sales is already used. Okay, sales dollars. And then if we take a look at this measure, so by selecting that, we can see we have the same value for our sum of sales. Now, when we bring this into a table, we have our single value. But the powerful thing about Power BI is that it's essentially a massive pivot table where you can then adjust your tables by the columns and slices and the calculations that you create. So for example, if we bring in segment, we're going to see that sales has been split by segment. If we then brought in shipping mode, we can see that it's doing the same thing once again. So measures are very dynamic, and when you're doing more advanced calculations, you can begin to use measures to do more interesting things such as rolling averages, previous years, etc. Where you might struggle with your standard columns, measures will be the place to go to. So let's go ahead and create a few more measures for our card visual. Now, it's always recommended when you start working with multiple measures and multiple calculations in your model, having a location to actually store them. So right now they're within our data table. Let's create a dedicated measures table. So by going to enter data, we can now create a blank table where we can store our calculations. So you can call this whatever you want aside from measures, because it just won't let you, but you can call it measures table or anything after that. So if we load that in, we can now move our calculations. So let's wait for that table to load. And then if we select our sales measure, and then in the measure tools tab, we can just move that to the new table we created. And then once we've moved over one calculation, we can then remove column 1. And what this will do is create a very nice calculator symbol, making it very obvious that this is a dedicated measures table. So we've created that calculation. Let's go ahead and now look at another one where we just create our profit. So we have the profit column. Let's go ahead and create a measure for that. So let's create another calculation for our profit. So by going to the table view and then taking a look at our profit column, let's go ahead and create a measure for this. So select new measure. Let's call this profit dollars and then sum the profit column. And we now have a calculation for our profit. See, I didn't select that. So if whenever you're creating a calculation, it's worth selecting the table, the measures table, and then it will store it in there. But I didn't do that, so I'm having to move that manually now. And let's move that to the measures table. Cool. So we've got our second calculation. So let's take a look at both of them. We have sales and profit. And using these two, we can now work out our cost. So we can do that by using our measure. And it's always recommended to do measures instead of calculated columns, but I'll show you that in a moment. But what we can do is call this cost and do sales measure minus our profit measure. And then if we bring that into the table, we can see we have our cost. So this is when a measure, and you're referencing multiple measures in calculations, that's where measures become very powerful. There's another thing called calculated columns. Now, these are slightly different because these columns are stored in memory. So if we create a new column, we can see what we can do is call this cost2, and then just do the sales column. So in calculated columns, we can actually specify the column name, and this can only be created in the table view. So sales minus the profit column, and we can see it will produce the same result. The difference is this is being stored in memory at a row by row level. So every row's worth of data for this calculation is being stored, whereas the measure is only going to be brought or calculated upon what the sort of context of the visual is. So it's calculated columns are quite bad for memory, and as your data sets get bigger, you do want to avoid them. But in any case, there are use cases for both, but it's just worth being aware. So let's go ahead and create our card visual. So we have our 3 calculations. You know what, I need to clean this up because I accidentally created 2 earlier. So what I'm going to do is just move that and then delete this other table. It's just storing it in Power Query for some reason. So let me, what did I call that? So measures table, let's delete that. And then, so let's go ahead and create the card visual. So we can do that by selecting the new card visual, and then what this allows us to do is create individual cards for our calculations. So if we select sales and then we select cost, we can see it's starting to build more and more cards. And then if we bring on our profit, we now have our free calculations. If we take a look at the cards, our values themselves are different. So this one is a larger number in a sense where it has more values. Over here it says 11.17 million and 1.47. Let's actually display our values and the actual value it is. So to do so, if we select our cards and then go to call out values, and then what we have to do is specify at a column level. You can't do it on all. So if we specify each column and then turn off the display units to none, if we do the same for cost, turn that to none, and display units, turn to none. And as you can see, all of our values are now actually displaying as a whole. And if we want to turn off decimal points, we can do that as well. We can just go 0 and then 0. And let's do the same for our sales as well. So we have our free card visuals, and now we want to apply the dollar symbol. So we can see our sales has it, but the other two don't. So if we select our measures, it will then automatically take us to the formatting view, and then we can format this as a actually monetary value or money. So if we do that and then do the same for our cost, we can see that the dollar symbol is now appearing. So that's our actual card visual. Let's go ahead and format this so it matches our design that we're trying to create. So if we select the card visual and then go to size and style, if we set the height to 122 and the width to 882, and then the horizontal to 271 and the vertical to 129, we have the card visuals that align with our design. So let's go ahead and move on to the bar chart. So let's go ahead and move on to our bar chart. So to create visualizations, we go to build, and we have a range of different options for chart types. Now we're going to select clustered column chart and then drag that to the position we want it. Now to add columns and actually create our visuals, this is consistent across most visuals where we have an x-axis, y-axis, and then a legend. So let's bring in our x-axis. So if we drag in the month column and then bring in a value, so let's bring in our sales, we now have a bar chart. And it's picked up the colors that we've defined in our theme, but not the one that we want. So we can adjust that and then go to columns and then color and then select the blue. Now, as we can see, it has all of the colors that we applied. But if we never, we would then have to select this, more colors, and then actually search for those colors every single time. So applying it to the theme really does help. So we have our bar chart. Let's go ahead and add a secondary bar. So we can do that by bringing in our cost and then bringing that below sales. And now we have two bars representing cost and sales. Our legend is in the top left-hand corner, so we can adjust that by going to legend and then setting that to bottom center. And I tend to remove the legend title because it's quite obvious that the green bar means cost, and in this case, the gray bar means sales. So let's go ahead and remove that by turning off the title. Now the colors aren't what I want, so once again, I'm going to columns and then choose sales. So we want our sales to be blue, and then we want our cost to be grey. So now we want to overlap our bars so that our cost is behind our sales. So to do that, we can go to columns, so it's in the formatting pane, and we have to select all. So you can only do this across all of them, and then we go to layout and then overlap, and then we can then overlap our bars. So adjust this to where you're comfortable. Then if we select flip overlap, then our cost is now behind our sales. So we now have our bar chart. Let's go ahead and adjust the size so that it matches our design. So what we're going to do is select the bar, go to size and style, and then let's go ahead and now adjust for sizing. So let me just bring that up. And the sizing for our bar chart is 305 for the height, 790 for the width, 278 for horizontal, and then 380 for our vertical. And that's the size of the visual. So we've created our bar chart. Let's go ahead and create the background elements for our visuals. So by copying the page navigation and then changing the width of this to 432, we can then bring this to the right hand side, format, and then center back. And then once again, if we copy this shape and then within the gaps, if we bring this lower let's just get a rough estimate because we're going to be very precise here with the dimensions. We're going to set this one to 539, 357 for the width. For the height, 109.3, and for the vertical, we're going to set this to 270. And then if we duplicate this shape, actually, this doesn't have rounded edges. So if we go back to size and style, and then rounded corners, we want to set this to 9. So shape style under size and style. Actually, no, shape style, and then set the rounded corners to 9. There we go. So now let's copy this shape and bring this slightly below and just get the alignment right, and then we'll put the specifics in. So the alignment is fine, and the adjustments that we have to make are the height is 241, width is 356, horizontal is 109.3, and vertical is 821. Perfect. And then 2 more visuals. So let's copy that, align it with this edge. And then the dimensions for this shape are 351, 548, and 531 horizontal. And then vertical, we want this as 710. And then we can just finalize this by creating our final background element. So these are all of our visuals, but we can see our bar chart doesn't actually have anything there. So what we're going to do is use this shape where we're going to create something a little bit more bespoke. So if we copy and paste that, which is essentially the same as these visuals, just with 50% transparency, bring this across slightly below. Let's send this to the back. And to create a slightly more bespoke shape, we're going to double it up. So let's bring this here. It's a bit fiddly, but once we set up the formatting, it's going to work nicely. And then if we bring this up slightly, and then send this to the back, do the same for the upper shape, send this to the back as well. We now have a very nice 2-layered shape. And what we can do now is start to focus on our title. Now the bar chart, we need to adjust that slightly. So let's just get it in. What's this shape? Don't know where that's come from, but we can remove that one. Perfect. So we now have our shape. Let's turn off the title and then copy our dashboard title and bring it into this space here and call this sales performance. So let's go ahead and create another visual, which is our customers broken down by our segment. So if we take a look at the data, we have this column called customer. Now, usually you'll do this on a customer ID column, but we don't have that. So we're just going to do a new measure. I already started creating one, and we do distinct count, and then we're going to do customer. Oh, and then what we can do is use a new card visual, bring that into our visual, and then at the top left hand corner we can place that. If we go to cards and then turn off the border and then go to values, so call out values, let's turn up the values. I always get slightly confused. Yep, we can make this slightly bigger, and that's fine. And then for our actual label, we're going to make that smaller. That's a bit too small, but there we go. And then we can adjust the space between so they're slightly closer. So let's adjust the spacing. Perfect. And now we're going to create our bar chart. So if we go to clustered column, let's bring in our segment. So our segment field, and then bring in our customers measure. So we now have our bar chart. Let's make this bigger and turn off the title. So let's turn off title. Let's turn off the y-axis. So we're going to turn off values. And then if we set the color of this, so go to columns, and then the color, because we're only using one dimension, we can just do it on all, is going to be green. So that's our second visual that we have. We can adjust the spacing a little bit, and then the text will, or the x-axis text will align properly. So we've done some adjustments and we have our second visual. So let's go ahead and create the line chart now. So this is going to be our profit over time. So this time we're going to use a line and clustered column chart. And then for our x-axis, we're going to bring in month. And then for our values, we're going to bring in our sales. If we bring that into the y-axis, and then for our line y-axis, I'm going to bring in cost. So we have our visual, and now let's go ahead and format that. So what I'm going to do is turn off the y-axis, so turn off the values there, and let's adjust the line so that it's smooth. So we have our visual, let's go ahead and format this. So I'm going to turn off the y-axis values, and then for our lines, so if we head over to lines, we're going to set this to not solid. We're going to set this solid, and then where's that gone? Join type round, and then instead of linear, we want this to be set to smooth. And then for our shade area, if we turn that on, we're going to set this to our gray. So let's do all, and then shade area, don't match line color, set this to gray. Perfect. And then for our bars, so let's close this all. For our columns, we're going to set a conditional formatting. So we want our lowest profit to be red. So if we click FX, what we can do is ensure that we first make sure it's looking at profit, and it's actually gradient, and then make sure it's looking at profit. Our lowest value is going to be red, and our highest value is going to be gray. And if we want to add a middle color, let's set that to gray as well. And then for our legend, what we can do is set that to the bottom. So let's get our legend and then set that to bottom center, and then turn off the title. Perfect. So we've got our legend, and now let's turn off the title, and we've created our third shape. So we now have our third shape. Let's go ahead and create that donut chart. So this is slightly different, where usually you would just have one, but we're being a little bit more creative here. So what we're going to do is have our different shipping modes, or what was the value? It was shipping modes, yeah. So if we bring that in, so where's our shipping mode? There we go, into the legend. And then for our values, we're going to do orders. So we don't actually have a orders measure. So for this, we can see that every row represents a new order. So we can use this measure called count rows. So count rows works at a table level. So let's just call this orders, and then do count rows order superstore orders. So we now have an orders measure, and let's bring that into values, and we have a donut chart. But obviously this isn't what we want in the final result, so we need to adjust this. So let's turn off the detail labels, and then the slices, we're going to adjust the spacing, make that a lot thinner, turn the title off, and now we're going to have some fun with the colors. So what we're doing, we're creating multiple donut charts, and then we're layering them on top of each other. So for standard class, we're going to keep that as blue, and then let's change that to the green. And then for all of our others, we're going to set this to gray. So they look like we don't really want to look at that data for that data point. And then what we can do is adjust the size of this shape. And then what we're just going to do is just copy it. So if we copy this shape, we can then make it smaller and layer that between. So instead of standard class this time, let's set that to gray. We're going to set second class to blue. And then we can keep doing that and make it smaller, and make this one red, etc. So you could do that as many times as you want. So we've created that. Let's go ahead and create a card for our orders. So if we just copy this card we've already created, bring that into the top right hand corner, adjust the sizing slightly. And then what we want to do is remove customers and place orders. And then instead of having our display units set to K, we want to set that to none. So if we go to call out values, orders, and then set the display units to none, and let's make this value a lot smaller. Perfect. And then if we select our measure, let's add a comma so it's slightly easier to read, and then turn off the background color, so size and style. Nope, it's not there. We have it in cards. If we turn off the card background color, we can very nicely just place that in the top right hand corner. And if you use your arrows, so if you select your visual or select the border, and what I tend to do, and why is it not working now? Let's see, if you select that, and then you can use your arrow keys to place it and adjust it in a very fine manner. It's a lot more easier to do fine changes using the arrow key. Now I do need to adjust our actual donut chart. So let's bring that down slightly. So this is a bit painful, but there's worse things you can really do, if I'm honest. It's not the most painful thing you can do in Power BI. So let's go ahead and actually create the values for our pie chart. So what we're going to use is the multi-row card. And what we can do is bring in our orders, And then from there, what we're going to do is bring in our shipping mode, and that will split that out. Now in this scenario, it's scrolling down and we want to have one on this side and one here as well. So what we're going to do is our filter visuals and then just select two. So first class, same day. And then if we copy that, and this time we can select the other two. Perfect. So we have our two shapes and they're filtering. So now we need to create a legend because we don't actually know what color this represents. So what we can do is a nice little trick. If we create a donut chart once again, and this time if we bring in our shipping mode, so let's bring that in, and then bring in some values. Let's just bring in our orders. It will create a pie chart or what is this called again? A donut chart. And from there, what we can do is turn off detail labels and then turn on our legend and then turn off our title. And if we make this visual smaller, the pie or the donut chart will eventually disappear, but the legend will remain. And then because the legend's set to top left, or we can set it to bottom center, it will remain in the middle. But if we did something like top left, it doesn't really matter. So let's just set it to bottom center, and we now have our legend. Turn off the title, but we now have a legend that we can use for our donut chart that we've created. So it's a custom donut chart, which is different, let's just say. So feel free to adjust the colors to actually match what you did inside of your donut chart. You can do that by selecting this, going to legend, slices, and then adjusting what the legend looks like in this as well. So we've created our donut chart. Let's go ahead and create this KPI card. So we're going to copy this legend that we created. Let's bring this to the top here. And this time, instead of using shipping mode, we're going to use our category. And then let's create a text box. So we're going to create a text box. So let's copy this one and drag that below. And this time we're going to write what is a typical order size. Let's make this slightly smaller in terms of its font. So we're going to set this to 14. And then what we can do is actually just copy this card once again, bring that below. Let's turn off the background. So properties, not visual, size and style. Nope, call out values. Where's it gone? Cards, background, and place that there. And the customers is above our value, so we can adjust that so it's below. So if we go to the formatting tab once again, and then for our call out values, go to layout, not layout, label, and then what we can do is the position, change that to below. So that makes it a little bit easier to read. And I'm just going to adjust this so it's slightly higher. So now that we've placed our card visual, let's go ahead and create a measure for our typical order size. So this is going to be our quantity. So let's take a look at the data set. And if we go to our Superstore table, we'll find this column called quantity. And this is essentially how many items are in that order. So let's go ahead and create an average of that column. So let's select our table and say average the quantity column, so we know what a typical order size is. So let's call this quantity average. And if we just write average and then the quantity column, we now have our average order size. And then if we replace customers with our quantity average, we'll now get what our average order size is. So let's just call this products quantity, and that will then change our name. So now let's create a bar that will show us our average order size against our segments. So if we come to our build visualizations panel, we can click the stacked bar chart, and then let's bring that lower. And then for our x-axis, we're going to bring in our quantity average, and then we want to split this out by our segments. So if we bring in segment into our legend, that will now split that out. So let's go ahead and just turn off all of the values. So we don't want a legend, we don't want a title. Let's turn off the values for our x-axis and the same for our y-axis. Perfect. And then if we turn our data labels on, and if we take a look at our visual, we can now make this wider. Just the thinness of that, so the width, bring that below. Let's make it slightly wider, and then adjust our colors to match our legend here. So if we go to bars, we can then change that one by one. So consumer is green, our corporate is our red, and then our home office is our orange. Perfect. So we've created our bar. Let's just align that so it matches up. And to align it properly, if we just select all of that, let's just put it into the center. So let's bring that all in. If we hold shift, we can select some other items and then we can drag that there. And let's drag this here. Perfect. So we've now created our KPI card. Let's move on to our two visuals here. So once again, if we just copy one of the backgrounds, let's just bring this one into the center. And then what we want to do for this shape, we want the background to be a green. And then our visual border, we want that to be the green as well. Perfect. And this card is going to represent the number of products that we have. So to do this calculation, so if we look at our data, we'll find this column that has our products, so our product name, and then we can just do a count of this column. Actually, we have a product ID field, so we can just do a distinct count of this column to work out the number of products that we have. So let's create a new measure and call this products. And then if we just do distinct count of the product ID column, and then if we just copy this card, bring that into the center, and then bring our product measure into this, so products, we now have our card. And let's turn the display values on. So if we go to call out values, select our value products, and then set that to white, and then for our display units, set that to none. And then let's do this after actually. So we'll go to our label, set that to white as well. So let's click our products measure and add a comma. So if we select that, we can then format that with a comma. And now we can see the number of products that we have. Perfect. So now that we've added the number of products, we can think of two supporting pieces of information for this. That's our high level. Let's break that down to a product level so we can see what the average profit is and the average sale amount is at a product level. Now, the reason we're doing this, and it's just a general concept that I'll cover in another video, is we're trying to tell a story with our data. So in this table here, we have our number of orders by shipping mode, and then we have what our typical order size is. So this is an example of where we're telling a story from the high level all the way down to the detailed granular level. And what we're going to do here with our products is also show what is the average sale amount and what is the average profit. And by doing so, we're showing the picture that there's 10,000 products. There's 10,000 products, and our average profit from those and our average sale amount from those is that. So by supporting your high level with detail, you're actually starting to tell a data story. So let's go ahead and create those two cards. So if we just copy this one and bring that there, we can just do an average of our profit column and then an average of our sales column. So let's go ahead and just do that. So we're going to create two more measures. And we're going to write profit average, and this time do average profit. And we're going to create one more measure, which is our sales amount average. So let's call this sales average, and then do average the sales column. So we've created our two measures. Let's duplicate this card once more. And then in one of them, let's bring in our sales average. And then in our other card, let's bring in our profit average. Perfect. Top tip, if you select both of these cards by holding a shift, because they're the same visual type, we can then format them both at the same time. So if we go to our call out values, we can set this to white and it will apply to both. Let's adjust the size so it's slightly smaller. And we're going to do the same for our headers as well. So let's make that white. And now what we want to do is add a line chart to show us our products over time. So if we create a line chart, and what we can do is bring in our products into the y-axis, and into our x-axis, let's bring in our month name or our month columns from order date. So I'm just going to drag that in. And we can see we have our line chart. And what we're going to do actually change this to a area chart, and then let's go ahead and turn off all of the axis. So we turn off the title, we go to x-axis, values off, y-axis, values off, and we now have a line chart that we can simply place in the bottom of our visual. Really simple to do, and it adds a bit more layer to this KPI card. And top tip, if you hold Alt, it allows you to be a little bit more precise with your formatting. Great. So we now have our KPI card. Let's go ahead and create our final visualization before we move on to the navigation panel, which is going to be a clustered bar chart. If we drag that over here and then just adjust the width so it matches and aligns, and then with the bottom as well, we can now start creating this visual. So let's bring in our subcategory into the y-axis. And then for our x-axis, let's bring in our sales. And then to apply some conditional formatting, let's go to bars and then color, click the FX symbol, gradient, and then we don't want count of subcategory, we want our cells. So we want it to grade the color and actually show the conditional formatting based on the cells. And if we add a middle color as gray, for the maximum value as gray, we want to highlight which ones aren't doing well. Did I do gray or did I do white? Let's take a look. Oh, I did white. So let's select gray. And that's applied our conditional formatting. And it looks like I still have the title. So let's turn that off. And now we need our background for this visual. So if we just copy one of these, place it above, and then if we match the bottom, we now just have to play with the alignment, or not the alignment, where we position it. So if we go to format and then center back, and now we want to send our background all the way to the back, we now have the outline appearing. So we've created our final visual. Let's go ahead and create our page navigator. So by going to insert, buttons, and then heading to the bottom and selecting page navigator, this will bring in a visual that allows us to select different pages in our report. So I've already created 4, but if we want to create another one, let's just call this test 1 and then head back to the overview tab. We can see that it would have added another tab for us to navigate to. But if we want to sort of hide or enable the pages, what we can do is go to pages, show, and then choose which pages we want in our navigator. But I'm just going to delete that as we don't need that page. So now let's change this from horizontal to vertical. So by selecting the navigator, grid layout, and then orientation to vertical, let's just change the width. We can see that this is now looking much better for our report. But let's go ahead and actually format this now. So let's just close this and then go to style. So our default state, we want the fill to be white. So this is the default state. And then in our selected state, we want that to be green. So the fill to be green. And we can demonstrate that by heading over to the performance tab where I already have one, and we can see it's now green for performance and not for overview. So let's just head back to the overview tab and adjust this further. So in terms of our visual, let's turn off the border. We don't want the border in selected or in our default. Fine. Let's make the width of this slightly smaller and now adjust the layout of our text. So by going back to our style and then for our default state, and this will apply to all, we want that to be left. And then for our padding, let's set this to 26. And then let's create a little title for our menu. So what I'm going to do is just copy something over. And let's just look at the formatting. So for our formatting, what we want to use is DIN and then 10.5. So I'm just going to make this slightly thinner as it's too wide and bring this higher. And then let's make it so that our non-selected items are actually grayed out slightly lighter. So I'll change the font color in the default state to a gray, so it's very much obvious they're not selected. And if we want a hover, we can select hover and then just apply a darker color. So now it's very obvious we're hovering. So let's create a separator and another set of navigation menus. So if we insert a line, so insert, shapes, and then a line, let's just bring that across to create a little separator. And then if we wanted to create another navigation menu or links to something else, we could just copy that, go to pages, and then turn off these tabs. So now we have another section for another set of page navigation. And the final thing we're going to do here is adjust the roundness of our rectangles. So if we go to shape, change this to rounded rectangle, and let's set this to 4%. And now we have our page navigator in its final form. So let's go ahead and work on the final details of sizing, fonts, etc. to give the report that polished look. So our header here, we want to set this to DIN and the size we want it to be 14. For our header, we want that to be DIN and we want to set that to 18. And now let's go ahead and add a few titles for our other visuals. So what we're going to do is first actually make that bold, copy that over, and let's bring that to this visual. And if we align it with that visual, it's going to be a bit fiddly, but I'm just going to leave it there for now. What that font is on that side is a DIN, and that's going to be 14. So DIN 14, but it's not bold. And if we copy this one over to our bottom visual, we're going to have our sales and costs over time. And then for this visual, we're just going to leave it as is. And then for our cards at the top, we're just going to make our values slightly bigger. So let's make that slightly bigger, and let me just confirm what that is in the final design. The values were 27 and Seg UI bold. So let's set that to 27, and that's the font there. And I think that's it in terms of a report. There is a clear slicer button. So if we just insert that actually, so clear all slicers, and there is a video on my channel about this button and how you can use it to clear essentially all of your slicer selections on the page. But let's just format this so you can see how that looks. If we go to button style, the fill, let's turn it on, set that to green, 0%, and then the shape, we want that to be a rounded rectangle. Make sure there's no border. We can put that in the center, and then for our text, let's set that to white. And that's actually the end of this tutorial. Thank you for watching if you got this far, and hopefully it was really useful in understanding how to build this report. If this type of content is useful to yourself, feel free to like and subscribe to see other videos like this. But without further ado, it's the Power BI